Pro Football Playbook, presented by the Pigskin Podcast Network. Your source for team news, draft needs, player profiles and rankings, full Senior Bowl, Combine, and NFL draft coverage. News, analysis, discussion. It's in the playbook. Now, here is your host, sports journalist Bill Alvstad, and featured analyst Keith Myers. Hey, Pro Football Playbook Podcast listeners. I'm Bill Alvstad, sitting down with Keith Myers again, your host and co-host, or both hosts, whatever you want to call it. We're sitting here again. We're talking quarterback 2022 market. So the offseason is here. Super Bowl is done, and now we're able to talk about this specific position group because it's fairly intriguing for a lot of different teams. Keith, how you doing?
I'm good. I'm ready for this. This is actually a really interesting year for quarterbacks and quarterback movement and everything. I think that we may see a bunch of names, trade places, or we may see a lot of talk and very little movement. It's going to be fun either way. But I think that it is an interesting year.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's kind of crazy. It's like the same names are coming up this season as far as being in the trade market. There's a whole host of free agent quarterbacks, none of which anybody's really talking about or enamored with. Mm-hmm. And then we've got a draft class in 2022 that seems to be the most talent poor draft class that we've had for at least close to 10 years. And it all kind of comes together in this market that provides a ton of question marks for teams that actually need quarterbacks this year. And we'll talk about all of it. Let's talk about.
I don't know if this is the worst quarterback class, because go back to
I don't know.
What year did Geno Smith come out?
That's what I'm talking about.
Was that 10 years ago? God, now you're making me feel old.
Well, I was thinking 2013. Where you had EJ Emanuel, Geno Smith, Mike Glennon. That was not terrible good,
group.
Right?
That was a terrible group.
I would think that eventually it's easy to get enamored with the class now, because you take a look at who's out there, and these guys are in it right now, and you just watch the Senior Bowl, and now you're gonna have the Combine. You can talk yourself in to having guys like Kenny Pickett and Matt Corral be first round picks, or Malik Willis have the highest upside of any quarterback you've seen in the last whatever. But the reality is that the quarterbacks at the top of this class would have been, the sixth or seventh quarterbacks taken in the 2021 draft class.
Yeah.
That's what I'm talking about.
Last year's draft class was stacked with starting level talent.
That hasn't completely played out yet, but we'll give that a little bit more time.
But it's easy to look at them in college and be like, yes, these were good prospects. And will all of them pan out? Probably not, because for various reasons, different players don't make it at the next level. But then you look at this year's draft class, and honestly, there's like two that I would draft with the expectation that they might start, and one of them I wouldn't start next year. He is at least a year away.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about this in an order that makes sense. Let's talk about first the teams in the NFL that seem to be set at quarterback, and we can go through those individually. We just kind of list them out. I'll just list them out, and you can kind of tell me if I'm on track here. So the Bills, the Patriots, Jets, Ravens, Bengals, Colts, possibly. Jaguars, Titans, Chiefs, Chargers, Cowboys, Bears, Cardinals, Rams, 49ers all seem to have quarterbacks set for this season, and quite a few of those are set up for the foreseeable future. Any of those stand out that maybe are question marks?
Well, you have to look at with the Cardinals and what's been going on with them and Kyler Murray, and Murray like removing all of his like references to the Cardinals from all of his social media. And then there being leaks from the Cardinals saying he's not a good leader and he's a finger pointer.
He's kind of pouty. is what he is.
It kind of feels like they're headed towards a divorce, if not this year, then next year.
Wow. Wow. Right.
I mean, can they fix it? Sure, but it feels that way. The other team,
I think they can fix it. They have a lot of motivation to fix that.
Yeah, but they don't have. Where's the motivation for them to leak out that he's, pouty and a finger pointer and not a good leader? Like, why would you leak that?
Yeah, that really depends on where that's actually coming from.
And then the other team is the Colts, because how can you look at what happened this year, especially in the last game of the year, when a win and you're in the playoffs against the worst team in the NFL, and your quarterback lays that egg and keeps you out of the playoffs.
The Colts are the best, have the best roster with the most question mark out of this team list that I just mentioned, that have the largest question mark to me as far as, and you've heard chatter just this week. We heard about Pittsburgh being a desperate team. We'll talk about those guys in a little bit.
Yep.
Being in the works, deep in discussions about acquiring Carson Wentz.
Yeah.
I don't know about that particular move. I don't think Pittsburgh fans are going to be happy about that, but that's where they're at in discussions. Yeah. And I think the Colts, 1 year into this deal, maybe trying to get out of it at this point.
Yeah. I wouldn't put the Colts in the set team at all.
But the Colts would then have problems.
Yeah. But the thing is that they believe they have problems now. So
right.
I mean,
and they would want to try to get out of that contract.
Get out of that contract,
and maybe pick up a draft pick.
Get a draft pick for him, get out from underneath that contract, and get yourself in a position to bring in a quarterback. And we'll talk about those that are available, because you don't have to be a great quarterback to lead that team to the playoffs right now. You just can't be awful. And Carson Wentz,
but that roster, I'm telling you, if you could somehow get a veteran guy in there, I think that they would be better. They would be better off. They would possibly move into, if they got rid of Wentz, they might be right back into a trade market type team. We'll talk about that in a little bit.
Yeah, those are the two teams I wouldn't put as set. The Cardinals, you'd want them to be because of where they're at.
Okay.
But things are weird there. So
let's talk about the question mark team. So we'll add the Cardinals and the Colts to the question mark teams. I've got the Dolphins. It sounds like they're going to go with Tua, but I'm not sure. Raiders, Eagles, and Packers. Now, each one of those teams has quarterbacks. Each one of those teams has a quarterback on the roster that seemingly could win for them, but each has question marks. Tua, just because of the coaching change. Raiders, they just don't know about Carr long term. This would be the year possibly to kind of move on from that and look in a different direction. Eagles with Hurt, it seems like they're satisfied there, but then again, maybe he's not the piece that gets them into a franchise quarterback type of situation. And then the Packers, of course, with Aaron Rodgers. What do you think?
Well, I think the Dolphins are probably more as a set team for at least going into this next year, because one of the reasons for firing Flores was that he wasn't sold on Tua, and he wanted to make a change there, and ownership and the front office they're like, no, he's our guy, at least for now. And so that was a thing. I think he's safe. The other ones, yeah. I mean, even if Aaron Rodgers sticks around for another year with the Packers, like he said, he'll make his decision and then let them know. We're going to put this off for another year, and we're going to do it again.
Right.
And it comes down to this becomes a Brett Favre situation for them. They will need and want to, at some point, not have to deal with this year in and year out, because it hurts.
And when they do have a quarterback that they drafted high and love, we don't really know exactly what they've got there. I'm not enamored with them, but they might be. And then now would be the time to move on from Aaron Rodgers, regardless of what Aaron Rodgers wants to do, because he's got value. And the Packers could pick up a tremendous amount of value, keep their team relevant for a long time past Aaron Rodgers if they were so choose to move on. So
True, but you got to get a quarterback then. And
that's right.
That's the hard part. You can't.
That's the hard part.
They've gone from Favre to Rodgers to who's the next one, and I don't think you move on from Rodgers unless Rodgers says yes. I want to move on until you have a path to get that. Now, if it's not Jordan Love, then you don't have a path, and I think they would keep him. Maybe it is Jordan Love. I've heard talk that they're considering trading Jordan Love.
I just saw that. I just saw that the other day.
And so if they can trade him, if they can get a pick for him, it also tells Rodgers, hey, we're committed to you long term. So don't think that this is a year to year thing. And so maybe they can work out something.
It just seems like that whole Jordan Love thing was a thing that was just too cute at the time by their GM to bring in a player that kind of made everything just not work on the player relationship side of the equation. And I get you bring a quarterback in to be competitive and to give you a viable backup and possibly a player that could have value that you could build value with over time to be a chess piece. But that turned out not good. So how about
it's not that different from Jimmy Garoppolo to the Patriots when they drafted him, and that became a thing, and eventually Tom Brady went to Robert Kraft and said, we're not doing this, and basically forced the hand for Garoppolo to get traded. But in the end, it kind of soured that relationship between Brady and Belichick, and ultimately, Brady left. And so it's a similar situation there. You've got to be careful when you draft a quarterback in the first or second round when you've got an established, veteran who is a very good player. Now, a middling player, do what you got to do. But a superstar, man, be careful with that, because they have a lot more power in the NFL than any other position.
It is. It's crazy. It is. So future team needs. I kind of put this together thinking Vikings, Falcons, Seahawks. Seahawks were borderline for me. There's just a lot of chatter out there about the Seahawks and Russell Wilson all the time. And so that's really the only reason why I put it in there is there's a possibility that Russell Wilson could move, but probability, I don't see it. Vikings, Falcons, Cousins. We've never been enamored, you and I, with Kirk Cousins. I don't think the Vikings are either, and that's why he's on this list. And then the Falcons, Matt Ryan's just getting older.
Yeah. I think that the Vikings, you listen to the new coaching staff when they come in, they were committal towards Cousins, but also not. It was weird.
I get it though, right? But it's kind of like Kirk Cousins himself. It fits. It's like he's like oatmeal. Yeah, I can get by on oatmeal, but do I really want to? Okay, so and then the immediate need teams, and this is a pretty decent list, and most of these teams is accurate. Buccaneers, Brady left. Browns, we just don't know. Texans, Broncos, Giants.
I put the Browns into the question mark group because they have Baker Mayfield.
Well, they do.
He was good.
But from what I understand, they're done. So that's why I put him here.
Okay.
Washington Commanders, I put football team. Lions, Steelers, Panthers, Saints. To me, all these now, obviously the Lions, they have Jared Goff for another season, but
that's an immediate need.
That's an immediate need. Steelers, obviously, Panthers, Saints, obviously, Texans. So let's go ahead and look at the supply and demand market.
Okay.
So who's available? So I put down 3 different markets, basically a trade market, a free agent market, and the draft class. I thought I'd go through these. Trade market, Tyler Huntley, Baker Mayfield. I think that they've decided to move on. That's why I included Baker Mayfield in this list. He may not be extremely desirable, but a team that misses out on a bigger name may fall back on something like that. Deshaun Watson, who knows what's going to happen there on the legal front. Aaron Rodgers, Russell Wilson, Carson Wentz. I put.
Yeah. So Tyler Huntley is going to be probably the most attractive name on that list that actually gets moved. Simply because he's young, he's athletic, and comes with a cheap contract. Aaron Rodgers, I have a hard time seeing him move. Russell Wilson, I know there's a lot of chatter because it's fun, but the team has no desire to move on from him.
Wilson's and he's expressed no desire.
Yeah, and Wilson's going to have to come in and basically force his way out, and the team will honor it if he says he really wants out. But he doesn't seem to be doing that. So I think we could almost take his name off the list. Deshaun Watson is the guy that
is a wild card.
He's a wild. Will he get traded? I believe he will. But the question is, what is another team going to be willing to give up, knowing that he's probably going to be suspended for a chunk? If
have the public relations nightmare that the Texans live with now, they would invite that into their franchise. I don't know. I mean, and the fan base reacting to that sort of stuff, it's a different world now than it was 4 or 5 years ago with this kind of stuff. And we're talking about domestic violence and that sort of thing, sexual assault, etc. All right. And then the free agent market. So let's talk about players that are available without having to access the trade market. Marcus Mariota, Teddy Bridgewater, Jameis Winston, Andy Dalton, Mitch Trubisky. That's just kind of the medium market. That is the high end market for free agents, but it's really lukewarm. And then after those guys, you've got a whole host of second tier, third tier, fourth tier guys that are marginal backup quarterbacks in the NFL.
The guys you listed are already second tier. So you're talking
absolutely
third, fourth, and fifth. Because none of them is a starter. None of them is an NFL
this
starter.
Is bleak as you know what. And then the draft class: Kenny Pickett, Matt Corral, Malik Willis, Desmond Ridder, Carson Strong, Sam Howell, Bailey Zapp.
Yeah,
and then there's 4 or 5 guys that are back end of the roster guys you could talk about. But so what I'm saying is the supply and demand is horrible on the supply side, and the demand side is how you get 10 teams that we identified that you are going to have an immediate need for a quarterback. 10 teams, you're likely maybe to have 1 or 2 of those trade quarterbacks available. And then you've got a bunch of marginal starters at best, back end of the league type starters. And then you've got a draft class where none of those guys are ready to come in and start right away. So you've literally got no available starters with 10 teams that need starters.
Well, this is a problem with the NFL, just in general, is that there are not 32 humans on this planet capable of playing starting quarterback at an NFL level. There just isn't. There will always be more teams than franchise players, and that's how you end up with guys like you put the Titans as a set team with Ryan Tannehill. Is Ryan Tannehill an elite quarterback? No, but they're like, you know what, we have what we are going to get, and we're okay with that. And they're going to roll with that. There's been talk about, do the Cowboys move on from Dez Bryant? And they're like, sure, but only if they could get a Russell Wilson in return.
Not Dez Bryant.
Not just, God, why do I always do that? Dak Prescott. I've done that so many times. It's just, the 3-letter D names. But Dak Prescott and, but they're like, only if we get like a Russell Wilson in return. And then they're not going to move on because there's not enough players, and you can't win without a quarterback.
And that's the Kirk Cousins conundrum.
Yeah.
In a nutshell, essentially with Minnesota, it's like, what are we going to do?
Yeah. So unless you're in a situation where you are willing to rebuild and you're willing to jettison enough talent to tank for a year and get a high draft pick and take your shot at getting one in the draft. And if you did that this last year, then you're stuck with, Kenny Pickett as the best available. And he would have been the number 6 quarterback on the board a year ago. So, I mean,
so there's some desperate teams. There's some desperate teams that have lived without a quarterback for a while now. Mm-hmm. the Broncos,
Mm-hmm.
Washington come to mind, and you can throw the Lions in there. As teams that have experienced the dry spell of lacking a quarterback for a while now and are desperate. Their GM's jobs are on the line. Coaching staff's jobs are on the line. What are these teams going to do? It seems to me that these teams will likely go and get a soft answer in free agency with one of those marginal quarterbacks as a fallback option, and then try their hand at the draft and just get one of these guys in and hope they hit.
See, when you say desperate, that's not the list of teams that I would have included. I mean, the Broncos are one of them, simply because, well, they're there. But I would have included the Colts and the Steelers as desperate teams. Not
just because they have rosters that are ready to go.
Yes, and maybe even the Saints, because they have rosters that are ready to win.
And you could add the Buccaneers to that list.
Absolutely. And so you have these teams that are like, what do we need to do to win now? Because we have the rest of the roster. We just need the quarterback. And so what you'll end up seeing is you'll end up seeing a guy like Teddy Bridgewater move from one situation to another that's similar because that team can't get a quarterback. Jameis Winston will move from the Saints to another team, maybe the Broncos, because they ended up not in a position to get a quarterback. And so you'll see some of those move around, but those aren't,
and you'll see those question mark teams like the Dolphins, Raiders, Eagles, Packers stay with what they've got.
Yeah.
And then somebody like that. So let me ask you this on the trade market. So now that we've painted this bleakest possible picture for quarterbacks available and teams that are desperate or want to advance because they're one player away and it happens to be a quarterback, what could a trade market look like for a guy like Russell Wilson? I'm just throwing in Russell Wilson out there because we're familiar with Russell Wilson and that market. And what sort of desperation level as far as compensation would a team have to throw at the Seattle Seahawks for the Seattle Seahawks to consider a deal?
Well, look at what happened last year with the Bears. The Bears offered 3 first-round picks, I believe a second, a third, and 2 defensive starters, and Seattle said no. Without much consideration.
Would that equation change this year?
Why?
Exactly. Well, there's 1 year left, or 1 year less, contract-wise for the Seahawks to absorb.
With quarterbacks, it's so not, because you have
you could argue, though, that the Seahawks are in a worse spot this year because of the quarterback market. It's just dry. They could have at least gotten a draft pick out of it last year.
True, but you're also looking at it because the quarterback market is dry, that the price is going to go up. And that if someone was willing to give up that much.
Are we talking about 4 first-round picks, Keith? Or just 4, more players or
5,
more depth picks?
I don't know if you can make a package. The package the Bears offered Seattle for Russell Wilson would have been the largest package of trade compensation in the history of the NFL. And
well, what about the Ricky Williams Saints deal?
Yeah, but that was a draft, like, in terms of number of picks, but there was, a 5th, a 6th, a 7th. Now this was all, for 3 first round picks, a second and a third, and the defensive starters. And so it just, you look at that, and why did Seattle balk at it? Because they didn't see a path to a quarterback. Yes, the Bears ended up getting one in Fields, and maybe the Seahawks should have thought about, hey, this is how you build a championship team, is you get to a quarterback on a rookie deal and all that draft capital and whatnot. But you don't win without a quarterback, and they had one, so they didn't even really consider it. And so what would it take to get Russell Wilson from Seattle now?
Yeah. What would let's just say,
can I give you a scenario that the Seahawks might take?
Sure. Yes, please.
And you'd have to go to one of the teams that's in your set list, and say this was a Boomer Esiason proposal, and that is you trade Dak Prescott and a couple of first-round picks to Seattle for Russell Wilson. And there are going to be Cowboys fans that are going to be like, wait, what? We're going to trade our guy for their guy and give up picks? But if you view Dak as a guy that isn't going to win you the Super Bowl, and you know that Russell Wilson is an elite player, maybe you take that upgrade. And Seattle would go be like, sure, we could do that because it gives us a franchise quarterback in return. Even if it is a slightly lesser franchise quarterback, he's still a franchise quarterback, and we get the picks. But what does that do to the market? That doesn't change the market at all, because that's one team with a quarterback trading with another team with a quarterback. They're just trading quarterbacks. It still
would you do a marginal situation like Tua or Hurt in that same scenario, only maybe add another draft pick?
So, and that would depend on a team's, how they view Tua or Hurt or Carr, would be another one. Because like Tua would be an interesting one, because they've got, draft picks and they've got him and all of that. And so to give up, if they're ready to give up on Tua and they go, hey, we'll give you this guy who might be a franchise quarterback in a year, and all these picks, and you might be able to entice a team, especially a team like the Packers, because they're looking at a spot where if Rodgers leaves, they might be rebuilding. And so like Devontae Adams goes and they trade away some of their defensive talent, and they're kind of starting over, and you're giving them that young, cheap, very talented player at a tough position. That might be what the Packers need in order to make that trade. Carr being another one, because he is a guy who's won a lot and has put up tremendous stats and hasn't always had a great team around him. And so, he's a guy but again, these are teams that are question marks or a set team that's deciding to make a trade.
Is there any one of the immediate need teams on the list that would pull off a trade like that would give enough compensation for Seattle to consider it?
For Seattle? Oh man, I don't think so. Because I'm just looking at the list. I'm like, who's available?
Obviously, you'd have to have either a 3-team deal, or Seattle would have to tank for a year, because there's no quarterback coming back from any of these teams. And so you'd have to either get enough trade compensation, and Seattle would have to be at least comfortable enough to making it through a season with Tyler Huntley or Baker Mayfield or one of those guys, Marcus Mariota, somebody to placehold, and then, or go up in the draft and get your Kenny Pickett or Malik Willis or something, or Matt Corral or something like that, just to as a placeholder.
Yeah, they would have to do that. I don't know if any team's going to want to do that. These guys just aren't the talent that we saw a year ago. The one thing that you might see is, like I said, it depends on how teams view Tua. As far as the immediate need teams, it might be depending on how a team views Daniel Jones, because he's a guy in New York who has had games where he looks like a franchise quarterback, and then he has other games where he looks, like Geno Smith or Marcus Mariota, and just doesn't. And so I think that you have a guy there that is young, has been on a bad team without a lot of talent around him, and you might have a team that goes, we can see what we've got in him, much like Carolina did a year ago.
Top 10.
Yeah. And so if you can go get those 2 draft picks, bring in a guy like him, see what happens. And then the thing is, if he doesn't work out, if he ends up being the bad version of him, then you're not going to win a lot of games with him. And you're in position to draft a quarterback next year when the quarterback class is going to be significantly
And you would
better.
Assumably have another first-round draft pick to do that with, plus your own, and you could move around a little bit to do that. Yeah.
So if you could get, Jones, both of those top 10 picks from the Giants, and a first-round pick in the following year for a guy like Russell Wilson, see, now you're looking at something that might be possible to take and pry a player like that away from Seattle. But is it really worth it if you're that team? I know that you can't win without a quarterback, but think about what you're giving up as far as your ability to create a roster.
And there's no guarantees, even top 10 picks wash. And so that would not be a guarantee at all for Seattle. It would just be, we're wiping out some cap space, and we're literally rolling the franchise
And if you were gonna be a team that's gonna make a trade and give up everything for a quarterback, are the Giants in a position to do that and win? And I don't think they are. Now, if Tampa was trying to figure out how to do it and they were willing to give up just everything to go get a quarterback, that would make more sense to me because they've got a roster that's ready to win. They just need the signal caller. Whereas the Giants are going to give up all of that, all of those resources, and they don't have a roster ready to win right now.
How about the Browns?
Yeah, but
where you take what
did they have? What do they have to? I mean, yeah, you'd have to take Baker Mayfield. He'd be your placeholder for a year, while you wait. But what else do they have? Like,
I don't know. I mean, they've got Garrett. So how about Garrett Mayfield? Their first, second this year, first, second next year, something like that.
You're going to give up a guy like Myles Garrett?
Well, if you're desperate to win, and you're desperate to have your quarterback of the future forever, you might give up a pass rusher. Yeah.
If you give up Myles Garrett, who's your best defensive player, are you ready to win still?
Yeah, but that's only one guy. You know, we know that the quarterback position is instrumental in getting your team to the Super Bowl. If Myles Garrett was to go out, not wishing injury on anybody, if he had an ACL first game, missed the entire season, their season wouldn't be over if they had Russell Wilson.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, I think that trading for Aaron Rodgers, if he becomes available, will be cheaper. If you want a guy that maybe is, again, probably more, it's gonna hurt a lot less to acquire. Derek Carr comes to mind as a guy that you could probably get for a lot less. Russell Wilson's going to be expensive. And I think absolutely. And just you look at the fact that what the Bears offered last year and the Seahawks said no, that means you're going to have to go above that.
I know. And which is going to be awfully tempting for the Seahawks.
It is.
But man, they're in they had a down year last year, and there's a lot of things you can attribute to that. I don't see any reason why they couldn't climb right back up with some key offseason additions. The other team
think that too.
The other team that is that from all reports are going to be all in on getting, well, there's two. There's the Broncos and there's Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh has literally come out with videos. Mike Silver writing a report for the team. The team paid him to write a report that literally named, without naming, Russell Wilson as being a target that the team is going to need to go after in order to be successful this year. So they've really set themselves up to do whatever it takes, compensation wise, to get a guy.
Well, and the Steelers have a roster that is ready to win.
Exactly.
They do, and I don't know if most NFL fans recognize just how much they were held back by Ben Roethlisberger. Because he's a name, he's a guy that's with multiple Super Bowls, and he's probably going to be, a first ballot Hall of Famer and all of that. But he is not the player that he used to be. He was a statue that just didn't do anything. His yards per pass attempt was one of the worst in the league. He just really held that team back.
Yeah, and now they have Mason Rudolph.
Oh yeah, like that's a good thing.
Well, and they've said that was he's sarcasm. Their guy. If they don't do anything else, he's their guy.
Yeah,
sure. So they're going to be in win now. I mean, would you take a package from Pittsburgh that included like TJ Watt, for example, or Juju Smith-Schuster, or they've got a few players.
They've got players that they could include.
Najee Harris, running back. Micah Fitzpatrick, safety.
Yeah.
There's some attractive pieces there.
There's attractive players, but what do they have draft capital wise? Because that is ultimately you have to package things in a way that gets you younger, cheaper and stuff if you're trading away a superstar.
They've got the 10th pick in the draft or the something like that.
Well, they made the playoffs, so I know it's not. They're down there a ways, unless there was a trade. I haven't looked at Pittsburgh as far as what their compensation would be like. Simply because while yes, I think they're going to go after someone, I expect them to more go after a guy like Carr or Kirk Cousins. I think Kirk Cousins would actually be a nice fit for them and really elevate the quality of that team without possibly costing them everything, because you've got a new coaching staff there that's not as sold on, building around Kirk Cousins.
Interesting. Well, I don't know what's going to happen. It's going to be a tremendous offseason. I mean, shortly after the free agency starts, you start to see the trade market kind of bubble up because players are and come off the board quickly. Teams don't get who they were looking for. You start to see a little bit of desperation start to creep in, and then the combine. Maybe a quarterback rises or a couple fall, and then it starts to get really kind of crazy because teams are very desperate at that point. So we'll see.
Yeah, I would say that kind of the deadline for all of this is March 6th, because that's the date that is the deadline for franchising players. And it's also therefore the date that Aaron Rodgers has agreed with the Packers that any decision he's going to make is going to be by that point. And that's so that way they can franchise Devontae Adams if they need to. And so that date's going to give us a sense of what's going to happen, because if Aaron Rodgers says, I want out, then everyone's all in on Aaron Rodgers and everything heats up really quickly.
I do think that he's the leader of this movement here.
Yeah. If Aaron Rodgers says, nah, I'm in, then everyone instantly moves on to their next target, which, the next best player will be Russell Wilson. And if the Seahawks say, don't bother, then where does the market go from there? Probably to Deshawn Watson.
Yeah.
And
Jimmy Garoppolo, Tyler Huntley, Deshaun Watson. People are going to compromise their values. I'm sorry to say it, to get Watson. It could be one of those scenarios where teams are just that desperate.
We didn't talk about Jimmy Garoppolo in all of this because he wasn't on your list of and the trade market.
I left him out.
And he's a guy that he will get moved or something went seriously wrong with the Trey Lance pick, because they traded 3 first-round picks to get him, and you don't trade 3 first-round picks for a quarterback and not play them. And that's what they did this last year, because they were intent on, trying to not lose a year while developing a quarterback, because they thought they had the rest of the roster ready to compete.
A mistake, I think.
They made it to the NFC Championship game.
I agree.
You can't argue that.
Man, you can argue the entire NFC slide back door into the Super Bowl was, look at the way the Rams got in. They lost a lot of games going down the stretch. They kind of backed into that thing. They faced a marginalized 49er team, and then in the Super Bowl they went up against a team that was probably a year away from really being ready. And anyway, Garoppolo, that's another name I think people will overpay for now. They'll be slinging first round pick to 49ers for Jimmy Garoppolo. I would have thought it, but
I know. Think about the fact that Kirk Cousins got a fully guaranteed deal because he actually reached free agency and wasn't part of any kind of trade or anything ahead of time. Teams are that desperate. And Jimmy Garoppolo is a lesser version of Kirk Cousins. And teams are going to be like, you know what, we can win with them. Jimmy Garoppolo got the 49ers to an NFC title game last year. He got them to a Super Bowl a couple of years ago. They're like, yeah, you can win with him. But they won with him because the 49ers have one of the best, top to bottom, one of the best rosters in the NFL. They are solid, just especially on the defensive side of the ball, just almost everywhere, except for maybe cornerback. That is a really good roster. And the quarterback was a caretaker. not a playmaker. And if you're selling yourself in on a guy because of those wins and not looking at the tape and what he does, you're going to give up a lot and then be disappointed.
Yeah, definitely. Well, he's definitely not going to go win you games. So you better have a lead going into the last 5 minutes of the fourth quarter.
But honestly, the Steelers or the Buccaneers, are they better off with him than what they've got now? Yeah, they are. I mean, the Bucs aren't better off with him than Brady, but Brady's
and the
gone.
Colts. If Wentz moves on, you can add the Colts to that list.
Even if he doesn't move on, you're better off because Wentz was not good. He has not been good now for a couple of years. He was not good last year. He was not good his last year in Philly. It's been a while since we saw Carson Wentz play at a high level, and I don't know if he ever gets back to that level.
Yeah, he's just mentally, it's a mental thing for him at this point, I think. I mean, physically he's been beat up. He gets beat up. I don't know what it is about him, but he takes a lot of punishment as a quarterback. But mentally, he's not the same guy. Yeah,
he's just not. And I think that getting him back into Frank Reich's system and all of that, which is why, going to Indy was supposed to be how he relaunched his career and reboot it. But it didn't work. And it didn't work not because of Frank Reich and that system. It didn't work because of Carson Wentz. So I honestly think that they are looking to find something. They've got 1 year left. They might smile and nod and say the right things and keep him around because they've got a year left and they can't find anything else. That's an upgrade. But he's going to be a guy that their team is looking to replace.
Okay. Let's wrap this thing up. Good show. A lot of information. I think we have a much better understanding of the entire market. It'll be interesting. This next couple months up all the way through the draft is fascinating. It's always fascinating, but this year is really interesting to me just because of the lack of talent available and the demand is just going to be off the charts. It's going to create a lot of chatter. I think specifically around Russell Wilson and Aaron Rodgers. It's just going to be nonstop until those two things are resolved. And then I think the entire market kind of dominoes after that. So,
and honestly, my prediction is both of those guys stay.
I think that you're right because the alternative to both of those teams, not good.
Yeah. Jordan Love and Marcus Mariota or whoever ends up in Seattle. Yeah. I mean, come on. It is, it makes no sense for either of those teams to move on from, franchise quarterbacks.
Yeah. Once you have a franchise quarterback, man, you do everything you can to hold on to that. If the relationship isn't completely broken now, you could argue that it's teetering it for the Packers, but I think it's probably better than advertised. And then Russell Wilson and the Seahawks, I think is pretty darn good, all things considered. And to me, it's overplayed in the market, in the media, that whole scenario with Russell Wilson. I think that he's there, and I think that he'll be there for a while. He's got 2 years remaining in his contract. I don't see any indication why he wouldn't get paid again with the Seahawks, and so we'll just see.
Yeah, I mean, what you're going to probably see in Seattle is a reworking of Russell Wilson's contract. I mean, that's a team that does not like to do contracts early because they don't like the message that it sends, but they will quote unquote rework it for cap reasons in order to basically financially tie themselves to Wilson long term. And you take a look at Pete Carroll's not getting any younger, be 71 this year. They are in win now mode. They're going to go all in on their defense this year. Free agency is coming up. They need a little extra money. There's question marks around Bobby Wagner. There's some money sitting there. They can rework a Bobby Wagner contract or trade or release Bobby Wagner to put more money into different position groups there to make that team overall better. They've got a lot of money sitting there with Russell Wilson. Like you said, they could generate a lot more cap room. They're sitting pretty decent right now, top 10 cap room wise right now before any moves. They could get up and really be big players in this free agent market to help put their team over the top if they do a rework on Russell Wilson's deal, free up, $10
to $15 million of cap space. That's a really nice premier player that they could bring in if they do that. Same with Bobby Wagner. That team could be in a position to win with Russell Wilson at quarterback into the 2-3 year window here. And I think that's what they'll likely try to do.
Yeah. If you got a 71-year-old head coach, you're not rebuilding.
Bingo.
So I think that, and that's what you would have to do if you traded Wilson, because you're trading him for a boatload of picks and rebuilding around those picks. And they're not going to do that.
All right. Follow Keith on Twitter at Myers NFL. I'm at Alvstad NFL. You can follow the show on Twitter. You can follow us on our website and your favorite podcast platform and YouTube. We'd really love to grow the YouTube channel. So follow us there and share with all your friends and other football fans. So until next time, we'll see you guys. Thanks for listening to the Pro Football Playbook Podcast. Follow Keith at Myers NFL. Bill is at Alvstad NFL. The show is at PF_Playbook. Listen and subscribe on your favorite podcast app or YouTube and at our website, profootballplaybook.co.